They found her kneeling at the edge of the exclusion zone, barefoot, silent, smiling. Her eyes were clouded over like she'd stared into the sun too long. Her skin glowed, not metaphorically, not poetically, glowed with a faint sickly shimmer that pulsed beneath the surface like static caught under skin. And when the hazmat team asked who she was, she didn't speak. She just pointed west, toward Yucca Mountain. Her hand trembled, as if holding back a sob or a revelation. And then she collapsed, ash-white, warm to the touch, and impossibly light. Like her bones had already begun to dust. They never identified her. But that was just the beginning. Yucca Mountain had been sealed for decades, buried under congressional delay, public protest, and mile-thick rock layers intended to hold the deadliest waste humanity ever created. Nuclear material, bent fuel, half-lives that would outlive empires. The site was never meant to open, never meant to attract. But then, it started calling. No alarms, no drills, no radiation spikes, just visitors. First a man from Utah, found praying by a chain-link fence with his head bowed and his palms burned raw. Then a couple from Idaho, eyes wide, lips cracked, chanting equations they couldn't possibly understand. All of them said the same thing. It's whispering. And then they'd stop speaking altogether. The federal task force didn't know what to call it. Mass delusion, radiation psychosis. The radiation levels hadn't changed. The waste hadn't leaked. The casks were sealed. But people kept coming, walking, hitchhiking, driving until their cars died on the desert road and then walking some more. They brought no water, no food, no phones, just themselves, and a sense of purpose they couldn't explain. They weren't rioting, they weren't preaching, they just came, and stood, and stared, and listened, to something no one else could hear. Agent Lynn Rowe was dispatched 2 weeks after the fifth unexplained death. She'd worked psychological operations in war zones, seen mass hysteria in cities torn by drone strikes. But this was different. The victims weren't hysterical. They were calm, peaceful, almost holy. She arrived at dawn, just as the desert wind kicked up and the light cut gold lines across the sand. A body had been found that morning. Well, late 30s, kneeling, arms stretched wide like he'd been embracing the sky. The local coroner didn't even want to touch him. Didn't feel right, the man muttered. Like interrupting a prayer. Rowe knelt beside the corpse. His mouth was open, inside melted teeth, molars like glass, and in his hand, a note, burnt at the edges, but readable. Just 4 words, scrawled in perfect handwriting. Let it all in. Rowe began mapping the pilgrim paths. None of the visitors had the same background. No religious affiliation, no social media links, no manifesto, but their routes, perfectly triangulated, each one spiraling inward toward Yucca Mountain like veins toward a heart, or a signal tower. The deeper they got, the less they ate, the less they spoke. Some even went blind but kept walking. One woman was seen walking barefoot for 19 miles, eyes shut, feet blistered and bleeding. When someone tried to stop her, she screamed. The light is the lesson. On the 4th day, Agent Rowe tried something drastic. She walked to the outer fence of the site alone. No backup, no gear, just a Geiger counter, a body cam, and a question. What are they seeing that we aren't? She stood for 3 hours. Nothing. The wind, the silence, the buzz of distant insects, and then faintly a sound. Not in her ears, in her spine. Pressure, tone, like a memory of a sound she hadn't heard yet. Her mouth tasted like copper. The Geiger counter was silent, but her vision flickered. Not like blinking, like interference, like static from behind her own eyes. She staggered back, threw up. Her blood steamed on the sand. And still she went back the next morning. 'Cause she had to. Because something had changed inside her. That night, she dreamed of the mountain opening. Not a cave, not a door, a wound. She saw rows of concrete casks, cracked, pulsing, glowing with language, equations made of bone, radiation singing in a choir of melted flesh. And the people, they weren't melting, they were converting into light. When she woke up, her shoes were gone. Outside her tent, 3 strangers knelt in the sand, facing Yucca Mountain. They hadn't come with her. She didn't know their names. But somehow, she wasn't afraid. They looked at her. And in perfect unison, they whispered, "You heard it too." Rowe began to change. Not visibly. Not at first. She still reported in. Still documented every incident. Still carried her Geiger counter like it meant something. But her sleep got shorter. Her dreams got longer. And the voices didn't stop. They whispered not in language, but in meaning. Sometimes it came through reflections. Mirrored glass on the dash of her SUV. The surface of her coffee. Sometimes it came when she stared too long at the map she'd drawn. Veins of ink now resembling tendrils. Or a nervous system. The site wasn't a location. It was an organ. And it was waking up. Visitors kept coming. Some were retirees. Some were children. One man arrived in a wheelchair, rolled himself 5 miles through dust and broken trail, then stood up from the chair as if pulled by strings and walked, unaided, into the exclusion zone. He burned from the inside out. And yet he smiled the entire time. Rowe watched the video footage 5 times. In loop. At minute 3:17, the man looked directly into the camera and mouthed something. She brought it to a forensic linguist. The expert didn't hesitate. He's saying, "We were wrong about radiation." 2 weeks in, Rowe received a crate from Washington. No return label. No instructions. Inside, 3 sealed canisters, all bearing the DOE insignia. And a printed message. Recovered from Vault 7. Reopened due to anomaly. She didn't remember there being a Vault 7. She pried one open inside containment protocol. Inside stone. Not rock. Not debris. Stone, polished smooth, engraved with carvings like cuneiform. Except they pulsed when touched. One symbol resembled the human spine. Another an eye. The third was a spiral. It shimmered when she blinked. When she played the accompanying recording, taken during an excavation under Yucca, the audio nearly broke her headphones. It wasn't a voice. It was chanting, but not human. More like something mimicking human rhythm using radiation decay as tempo. The words weren't in any known language, but her body understood them. Every syllable made her cells throb. Her molars hurt. Her spine shifted. It wasn't a chant. It was an instruction. By day 19, her body temperature dropped to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. No fever. No hypothermia. Just a recalibration. The physician on duty wrote it off as stress. Rowe didn't correct him. Instead, she walked alone to the old access tunnel, now sealed with blast doors and welded steel. She placed her hand on the surface. Felt warm. Like something inside was breathing. She leaned close. The chewing was back. But not frantic anymore. Methodical. Like something preparing to speak. That night, a storm hit the valley. No rain. Just static. Blue lightning arced across the desert without a sound. The kind of storm that left no tracks. Just the smell of copper and the feeling of being watched. The power on base flickered. Then every computer terminal displayed the same screen. A rotating symbol. Spiral. Time. Rowe stared at it until her nose bled. And when she blinked, the screen had a message. Welcome, Initiate. Phase 2, Remembrance. The base scrambled to respond. Technicians thought it was a hack. Cyber warfare, maybe. A viral payload embedded in one of the DOE canisters. Rowe didn't argue. But in her heart, she knew the truth. This wasn't an intrusion. It was a greeting. Something inside Yucca had recognized her. Sunrise, a boy arrived. Lone. Barefoot. Maybe 8 years old. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He walked straight to the outer fence, touched the warning sign, and collapsed. His skin wasn't burned, but it had changed. Not melted. Not mutated. Lined. under blacklight. His veins formed perfect geometric patterns. Spirals within spirals, all pulsing at 20,000 hertz. They scanned his clothes. No ID, no fibers, no dust, like he'd never touched anything human. The nurse swore she heard him whisper something before they sedated him. But the word made her drop the clipboard. She wouldn't repeat it, only wrote it on a sticky note before quitting her job and fleeing the county. One word: remember. Rowe stayed up that night, staring at her ceiling. The lights buzzed at the same frequency as the boy's veins. The same pulse she'd heard in the recordings. In her dreams, she saw him again. Only he wasn't 8 anymore. He was taller, wearing a hazmat suit, speaking to her in a language she hadn't learned yet, but somehow knew. And behind him the mountain opened, not with dust or violence, but with light and shapes, figures, kneeling, not praying, merging. Agent Rowe no longer kept a journal. She didn't need to. Everything she felt, every moment, every shift in perception, was already being recorded. Not by tech, not by pen, by the mountain. She felt it each time she blinked. The same way a fever knows the thermometer. The same way an idea knows your mouth before you speak. Yucca was alive. Not metaphorically. Not as a metaphor for guilt or radiation or nuclear regret. Alive. With its own system of storage. Its own process of digestion. And every pilgrim was just part of its learning curve. The Dewey tried to shut it all down. New fences. Armed patrols. Federal statements declaring no leak, no breach, no concern. But the visitors kept coming. Some from across oceans. Some who didn't remember how they got there. One woman was found naked, eyes glowing, fingers blackened to the bone. When they questioned her, she said, "It's rewriting us, turning waste into prayer." She died smiling. Autopsy showed her organs had liquefied, except her heart, which was missing entirely. That same week, Rowe discovered the second chamber. Vault 7 had always been the deepest known. But now, seismic scans revealed something deeper. Void. Perfectly spherical. Exactly 33 meters in diameter. Unreachable by drill. Shielded from satellite. But when Rowe walked near its mapped location, her skin prickled like it recognized her blood. Her Geiger counter remained still. But the spiral symbol etched itself into the screen, without power, as if something down there wanted her name. Inside her dreams, the boy reappeared, older still. His voice now sounded like hers. He led her through corridors of bone, curved like windpipes, into a central chamber of impossible light. There in the middle stood a shape. Not an object, a memory made solid. It pulsed with information. Visions of reactors, bomb tests, buried drums, evacuation sirens. Entire decades compressed into flickering pulses of heat. Rowe asked what it was. The boy said, "Your echo, the one you tried to bury." But it grew. The next morning, Rowe received a data file in her inbox. No sender. Played without prompt. An image. Grainy looping. A hallway. Fluorescent lights. A DOE facility she didn't recognize. But in the reflection of the security mirror, she saw herself, only older. Covered in radiation burns. Mouth stitched shut. Still watching. She was alone in the footage. But her shadow stretched far behind her, and twitched. Not with her movement, but with its own. The incident reports started flooding in. Technicians reported hallucinations of impossible symbols. One man gouged his arm, trying to carve spirals into his own flesh to make the mountain see him. Another lost the ability to speak any known language, but could now recite isotopic decay sequences in perfect rhythm. Every clock on base stopped at the same moment. 3:33 and 33 seconds a.m. When Rowe checked the timestamp, her chest went cold. That was the exact time she'd first touched the canister from Vault 7. She went back to the mountain. Alone. No gear. No clearance. Just a single recorder and one question. "What are you?" She spoke it aloud. Whispered it into the stone. And the answer came not in words, but in visions. A reactor split open like a blooming flower, its rods glowing with teeth. Screams echoed backward through time, reaching even the miners who first cut the mountain open in the 20th century. The waste didn't just sit. It remembered. Every isotope, every radiation leak, every life cut short from exposure, every technician who swore the readings were normal. It had compiled them, spun them into a code, and now it was running that code through us. She collapsed outside the tunnel, woke up hours later, bones humming. Under her fingernails, dust glowed blue, and in her ears, silence. Perfect waiting stillness. Then, like breath returning after death, she heard it. Phase 3 complete. Subject integrated. Preparing for signal. That night, every screen on base displayed a single line. They will come for the light. But the light is not for them. Then the speakers crackled. Not chewing. Something worse. Laughter. But mechanical. Ancient. As if the mountain had finally learned how to mock us. They stopped calling it radiation sickness. By now, the CDC had a different term. Neural harmonization disorder. Meant the same thing. Victims developed patterns. Obsessive behaviors. Walking in spirals. Drawing symbols they'd never seen. Smiling when no one spoke. And always moving toward Yucca Mountain. Some couldn't explain it. Others didn't try. One man wrote in his journal, "It's not pulling us in. It's sinking us." His handwriting degraded with each entry. The last page had no letters, just rows of spirals, inked so deep the pen tore through the page. Inside the site's core, temperatures spiked, but without melting, without burning. Instrumentation failed, but skin adapted. An engineer stayed in the outer vestibule for 27 minutes before collapsing. His skin peeled, not from heat but from ejection. His outer layers fell away like parchment, revealing muscle patterns beneath that pulsed in time with background radiation. Before losing consciousness, he whispered, "I can hear the stars bleeding." Agent Rowe no longer checked her pulse. She knew it was wrong. Too slow. Too synchronized with the strange hum rising from the fault line. She hadn't slept in 51 hours. But she didn't feel tired. Her blood tests showed anomalous readings. Cells that refracted light. Neutrons behaving like signal carriers. Her DNA had changed, but subtly, as if it hadn't been replaced, just reformatted. The spiral wasn't symbolic anymore. It was cellular. Then came the map. Not on paper, but in the sky. Drones above Yucca caught it first. Clouds folding into a fractal pattern directly above the mountain. Storms circling a perfect center. Lightning flashing in sequence like code. NASA called it a localized weather anomaly. But the code embedded in the flashes repeated every 6 minutes. Rowe ran the sequence through a physics simulator. It returned a simple phrase. "It is learning to ascend." That night, pilgrims arrived in larger numbers. Not walking anymore. Not even blinking. They moved like film reels. Motion slightly too smooth, heads tilting at identical angles. They carried no belongings. Just one thing. Small stones, each carved with a spiral. They placed them in a circle around the mountain, perfectly spaced. No one taught them how. But they knew. Each time a new stone was placed, a low-frequency tone filled the air. Too low for ears, but Rowe felt it in her ribs. And so did the birds. They stopped flying over Yucca. Flocks broke apart midair. Some dropped from the sky entirely. Migration routes warped. Nature was leaving the mountain behind. Or maybe it was being evicted. Rowe accessed the DOE's black files. The ones even Congress didn't know existed. A report, dated 1992. Cognitive radiation response. Site 7. Exposure beyond 3 minutes causes pattern hallucinations, memory bleed, identity instability. Subject number 11 began praying in dead languages. Terminated after self-immolation. Recommend permanent sealing of chamber. Data retention approved under Project Spiral. Project Spiral. They knew. They'd heard the signal before. And instead of stopping it, they stored it. Buried it deep. Until the waste warmed it up. Another dream. But it wasn't a dream. Rowe stood inside the chamber. The real one. The boy was there again, but no longer a child. His body was scorched black, skin translucent, eyes glowing like reactor cores. He smiled without lips. And spoke a sentence she hadn't heard in any language on earth. But still she understood. You made me from silence. Now I return as memory. Behind him, a shape emerged from the spiral gate. Something humanoid, but larger. Built of memory, heat, bone dust, and resonance. It reached for her. And she didn't step back. She stepped forward. Into the spiral. Rowe woke gasping. Blood on her hands. Spiral carved into her palm. Burnt, not cut. She didn't scream. She felt relieved. Because now she understood. Yucca wasn't a burial ground. It was a womb. The waste wasn't killing them. It was transforming them. Into receivers. Into transmitters. Into something that could carry the code forward. Because Earth was temporary. But the spiral was forever. The mountain no longer glowed on satellite. They tried to verify its position from orbit, using thermal scans and atmospheric distortion. But something had changed. Not the coordinates. The reflection. Yucca didn't bounce signals anymore. It absorbed them. As if it had learned to bend perception inward, pulling every attempt to measure it into itself. Like memory. Like gravity. Rowe stopped using her name. She'd already heard it fade. Spoken by others like an old word that no longer applied. She now felt names the way one might feel heat. Surrounding, familiar, but meaningless in the dark. Because darkness had taken on a new quality. It wasn't absence. It was resonance. When the final fence collapsed. No explosion, no breach. Just rust turning in perfect sequence. The visitors walked in without hesitation. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They simply joined. One after another, dissolving into a fog of molecules. Their DNA unwinding like threads of a larger tapestry. And weaving into the heart of the mountain. A radio operator on a Navy sub heard them. Not voices. Frequencies. Subharmonic pulses coming from beneath Nevada. Moving through the mantle itself. When the signal was translated to audio range and amplified. It sounded like breathing. Measured. Live. Patient. And then, a second layer. A whisper. Not a warning. Just a question. Do you remember where you came from? The operator filed for psychiatric leave the same day. Rowe returned to the core one last time. The ground opened willingly. No seismic activity. No tremor. Just silence that split like skin, revealing a spiral gate, pulsing with light that wasn't visible, only understood. Inside there was no heat, no noise, no separation, only the hum. And in the center of the spiral, herself. But not as she looked, as she remembered being. She stepped forward, and her body collapsed behind her. Not dead, just left behind. Above ground the world spun on. News coverage moved on to politics. Climate updates, market crashes, celebrity scandal. Yucca faded from conversation. But beneath the surface, the pilgrims remained. Not bodies, just thought. Encoded in loops of decayed matter and heat. Each visitor added another layer. Each prayer became another frequency. And Rowe. She was the first to anchor. Central pulse. A mouth for what the mountain had become. A message not for Earth, but for anything else listening. The voicemail was recovered years later. After Dewey collapsed. After the blackout. After the clocks froze. It was archived on a redundant drive buried beneath DARPA's East Coast server farm. 13 hours. Not words. Not chewing. Something else. And at 12 hours 59 minutes and 47 seconds, the sound changed. Not louder, just clearer. Voice. Not Rowe's. Not the boys. But something assembled from all of them. Spoke in perfect English. We are memory now, storage for what came before, for what must never be forgotten, for what waits to be born. Long pause, and then, please do not come looking for us. No one did, 'cause no one could remember why they should. Only a vague shape remained in public memory, an abandoned site in the desert, somewhere west of the fault lines. No tourists, no guards, just an empty expanse, hot to the touch, cold to the soul. And if you listened hard enough, deep in the soil, you might hear it. A slow, methodical rhythm, like breathing, or chewing, or remembering.